Chapter 1. Even before Nathan's father told us about the rattlesnakes, something about Berry Springs made me nervous. Of course, this may be only hindsight, but I seem to remember feeling, when we drove past the battered city limit sign, that this was a place something had happened to, and that whatever it was had happened recently, and that somehow the place didn't know it yet. This feeling is mixed in with my memory of the old blue station wagon, the Whitley's second car. On the way south from the airport, I'd ridden in the back seat, so I remember the back of Nathan's head and shoulders as he drove. He hadn't cut his hair all that spring at college, and it waved over his collar in a way I suspected his father would hate. His hands rested lightly on the steering wheel, his long fingers tapping out some mysterious tune inside his head. I could see his 16-year-old sister Artis better. She sat beside him in the front seat. She had long brown braids, a sweet, interested face, and a mouthful of braces. She'd picked us up from the airport in Nashville, although Nathan wouldn't let her drive home. "Not in rush-hour traffic," he'd said, holding out his hand for the keys. "If you don't let me, I'll never learn." "Learn when I'm not in the car," Nathan told her. She pouted, and he looked at me and rolled his eyes. Still, I could tell there was affection between them, none of those hard-edged, pushing-around games I'd watched other siblings play. The May afternoon was already hot, with a damper heat than I was used to in California. The humidity made you uncomfortably aware of how close your clothes were to your skin. The minute Nathan and I had stepped off the plane, we'd dropped our duffel bags and guitars and rolled up our sleeves. The white sky held an even haze instead of clouds, although you would still have said the sun was shining. But as we drove south on smaller and smaller roads, the greenness was what impressed me most, the intense, new paint green of the trees lining the highway and covering the small hills around us. When I made some comment about it, Nathan said, "Enjoy it while you can. By August, everything will look tired and dusty." And this might be hindsight too, but that simple remark echoes in my mind like an omen, curling itself like one more snake into the uneasiness I remember as we drove into Berry Springs. Nathan and I had just finished our sophomore year at the university in Sacramento. The first time I'd ever talked to him was in the band hall at the start of the spring semester. I heard his voice before I saw his face, because he spoke with his head down, his hair hanging. "You here for the 3 o'clock?" I asked him, meaning the auditions for the 3 o'clock jazz band. "Yeah," he said. "I play, keyboards." "I'm a bass player," I told him casually, laying my oblong bass guitar case flat on one of the risers. "I already play in a band off campus. We do mostly rock, but I can read a jazz chart." "Cool," Nathan said, and eyed me through his hair. A good thing I hadn't made any more of a fool of myself trying to impress him, because his audition blew everybody, including the band director, out the door. Later I found out he was even better on guitar. He had come all the way from Tennessee because he'd always wanted to live in California, and his aunt and uncle here in Sacramento could keep an eye on him. At least, that was the idea. He was on a music scholarship majoring in orchestration. I'd grown up in Sacramento and was barely scraping by financially so I could stay in school and not get drafted. Having no idea what I wanted to do with my life, except not go to Vietnam, I'd taken only basic courses so far, and none of them were music, which was why I hadn't run into Nate before. Anyway, we both made it into the 3 o'clock and started hanging out together. I learned right away how shy he was and got used to the way he backed off every once in a while. Then, the night after spring break, he came down to my dorm room to ask me if I wanted to get high. I did, of course, so we sat outside in his beat-up Le Mans, just close enough to a security light to see the joint we were passing. Nathan seemed to have something on his mind, but you never could tell. Sometimes he was just quiet. After we'd both had a hit, I said, "How you been?" "All right," he said. "Your break go okay? Good to be home?" "Yeah." This was like pulling teeth. It was too dark to see his eyes, set so far back under his brows, but his profile looked calm. He took another hit and passed me the joint. We held our lungs full of smoke. Finally he blew out and said, "It's always hard to come back to such a crowd here at school. Everybody's talking, and the rooms are so small, and the lights are so bright. Well, you get used to it eventually, don't you? No, not really. Nathan sounded puzzled. I'd like it better if I didn't have a roommate, but my folks couldn't afford a private room. I mean, Steve's great and everything, but he's always got people coming in and out, and it's tough to find a place to be by myself. Go hang out in a practice room. I heard the whiff of his laugh. But to do that, you really have to practice, he said, and I could tell he was deliberately trying to lighten up. Hey, I wanted to ask you something. Go ahead. I got the idea you aren't crazy about staying with your mom this summer. That was putting it mildly. My mother had a new boyfriend, a real asshole, and I'd been wondering how her trailer could hold us all for 3 months without multiple homicide being somehow a factor. Well, I was thinking about taking some courses so I could stay in the dorm. Financial aid said I could keep working in the media center. Or you could come back to Tennessee with me. I looked at him. You serious? Why not? Nate, you've just been talking about how you need to be by yourself. Now you want somebody else around all summer? It's different at home, Nathan said. We have a lot of room, and I thought you could bring your acoustic and we could do some playing. We never have time here just to get together and jam. When I didn't speak, he said, My folks already said it's okay. Well, that's nice of 'em, but I can't just come and land on your family the whole summer. I sounded sharper than I'd intended, but suddenly I suspected him of feeling sorry for me, and I was damned if I'd be Nathan Whitley's summertime charity case. My face burned. Then Nathan didn't say anything else, and I started to feel bad. Look, it's great of you to ask me, man. Not that I wouldn't like to. I thought you might feel that way, he said, so my dad offered us both a job. Nathan's father was a minister, which was about as strange to me as if he'd been an astronaut and not nearly as exciting. I couldn't imagine what kind of job he might offer. Doing what? Well, the janitor at our church died last week. He was real old. They've got somebody to fill in temporarily, but the guy has to leave this summer, shipping out to Vietnam. We both accorded that a moment of silence before he went on. So Dad said we could do it during the summer and split the salary. It's not a full-time job. It'll take us a couple hours a day, and the rest of the time we can hang. I had to admit that sounded more respectable. At least it would give me my own spending bread, and maybe I could pay his parents a little for room and board. The plane fare worried me, though. How much does it cost to fly? About $80. If we can't raise it, Dad'll lend it to you, and you can pay him back after we start working. He said all that really fast, as if he were afraid of touching my pride again, but I'd already decided to go. Like most 20-year-olds, I was wild for something new to do, somewhere new to go. I decided I could stand being the poor relation for a while. As we passed another battered sign, this one saying, "The Berry Springs Rotary Club welcomes you," my anxiety centered on more concrete things. I wasn't exactly looking forward to meeting Nathan's father. He was a Korean War vet who, according to Nathan, had taught his kids to sing the Marine Corps hymn before they could walk. By now I had decided that not only would he yell at Nathan about his hair, but he would blame me as the bad influence because mine was even longer. And what if he and his wife were prejudiced? This was the South, wasn't it? Had Nathan told them I was part Mex? Would I really be welcomed here by the Rotary Club or anybody else? All of a sudden we hit a tacky little main street with a line of stores and other businesses. We passed a small town square and went by a Baptist church. The church on the next corner was Presbyterian. "We're next," Nathan said wryly, and Artis giggled. He turned down a side street, and I saw the red brick Methodist church with a dome and a green roof and stained glass windows. Beside it sat a square 2-story house, red brick like the church, its deep porch running across the front and down one side. "This is it." Nathan pulled into the side driveway and drove to the back of the house. "We never go in the front door." The church's gravel parking lot curved around behind a small backyard. Past that lay an unmowed field with grasses and other weeds as high as my head, sloping gently off to a line of tall trees. For some reason those trees drew my eyes as we got out of the car. "Is that a river down there?" I asked. Either Artis didn't hear me or she was too busy looking me over again to answer. I could tell she thought I looked strange. I wore a striped Indian shirt over my jeans, and my straight black hair had finally grown past my shoulders. I probably didn't look like anybody else in Berry Springs. My nervousness kicked in big time, especially when Artis said, "I'll run over to the church and tell Dad we're back." "Okay." Nathan followed my eyes across a field. "It's called Green River," he said. "It's great down there. I'll show you later on." "Does it ever flood?" I asked, looking over my shoulder as we headed toward the back steps. The idea of having a river practically in your backyard fascinated me. "Not since I've lived here." Nathan yanked open the screen door. "Hey," he called. "Well, you got here," we heard Mrs. Whitley say as we came through an enclosed back porch which had junk piled in it almost like a garage. We followed her voice into the kitchen, and Nathan put down his guitar and bag to give her a hug. After a minute, she stepped away from him to take a good look at me, smiling. "So you're Tim." She was always one to state the obvious, I learned, but she seemed glad to see me, so I smiled back. "Thanks for inviting me." "Oh, we're so glad to have you." Mrs. Whitley was medium everything, medium height and weight, medium brownish hair with medium curls. Her smile, though, was like Nathan's, and evidently our hair was not going to be an issue, at least with her. "Dad's at the church working on his sermon," she told Nate. "Yeah, Artie went to tell him we're here." "Sit down, sit down." Mrs. Whitley pulled out chairs from the round kitchen table. "Let me get you two something to drink." It surprised me how affable Nathan was with his family. He let his mom fuss over us without getting annoyed, the way I would have gotten with my mother. She opened Cokes and set out what she called nuts and bolts, that Czech cereal and peanuts mix. A wonderful smell, ham, I thought, suggested that supper couldn't be too far off, and still she kept trying to feed us things, and Nathan kept telling her, "No thanks, Mom," in this patient, friendly voice. I thought about being around my own mother. It was like a fencing match going on the whole time. Whereas Nathan and his mom weren't just being nice for my benefit or because it was the first day home. I don't know how I knew it, but this was how they treated each other all the time. After about 10 minutes, Nathan's father came tramping through the back porch, Artis following him. Mr. Whitley, or Brother Whitley, as I soon learned to call him like everybody else, it was even abbreviated to Bro in the church bulletin, hugged Nathan tightly. I could see where Nate got his tall, lean build. Artis actually looked more like her father. Her face had the same strong, regular features. She got a Coke and sat down at the table to look me over again. Brother Whitley didn't say anything about Nathan's hair or about mine when he shook hands with me. I was almost disappointed. His own hair was long enough to wave back from his forehead. I'd expected a military crew cut, but he even had sideburns. I learned later that he went through a whole can of the dry look every month. "Tim," he said, "glad you could come." Then we all sat around the table and made small talk, which I suspected was so the Whitleys could feel me out. At any rate, almost before I caught on, I was being given a gentle 3rd degree. "So you're from California," Mrs. Whitley said. "Parents still live there?" "My mom does. I'm not sure where my dad is right now." Brother and Mrs. Whitley nodded politely at this, but Artis stopped drinking her Coke and stared at me. I saw Nathan give her a look. "And you're majoring in—" "History," I said at random. This time Nathan gave me a look, and I almost laughed. But I couldn't tell these people I hadn't declared a major yet, hadn't seen my father since I was a kid. Something about them made me want to be more definite. "Nathan says you're a professional musician," Brother Whitley said. Nathan exaggerated, I told him, and shot a mock glare at Nate, who regarded me benignly. "I play bass in a rock band off campus, mostly just frat parties." "Wow," Artis said wide-eyed. "Do you have a girlfriend?" I was saved from answering by Mrs. Whitley, who jumped in her chair. "Nathan, that reminds me. Paige called a while ago." I looked quickly at Nathan. It seemed to me his whole face lifted a little, lightened up. But all he said was, "I didn't think she was back from UT yet. How come she didn't meet us at the airport?" "She's already got a summer job. She said she'd call you later." "Where's she working?" "Long John Silver's up in Kirbyville," Artis told him. "They just hired her like 2 days ago. She said she's only going to be working a few days a week, enough to make some spending money." Nathan looked a little relieved. "Well," he said, "as long as she's around some, to do a little singing with me and Tim." Like that's the only reason you're interested in her, I thought. I already envied Nate a lot of things, but Paige was paramount. A girl, your own live girl, who would understand you and want the same things you wanted, and you could have sex any time you felt like it. At least that was the way I imagined it, and by this time I'd built Paige up in my mind as a combination of Carole King and Miss February. I'd spent more time than I should have, wondering whether she and Nathan got it on whenever they were both home from college. Nathan, of course, had never talked about that. He was much more enthusiastic about what a wonderful voice she had. I reflected darkly on all this and finished my Coke, while Brother and Mrs. Whitley started in on Nathan, asking him how his final exams and music boards went. He answered patiently enough, but suddenly he seemed tired, pushing himself to get past more than monosyllables. At last I saw his parents exchange glances and back off, my first hint of how they protected him, although I had no idea why. Brother Whitley went off to watch the news, and Mrs. Whitley and Artis started getting supper on the table. Nathan and I took our bags and guitars up to his room. The staircase led up from a hallway broad enough to hold bookcases, a hallway almost as big as some of the trailers my mom and I had lived in. Upstairs there was another square hall with several doors facing off it. "That's Artie's room," Nathan said, nodding toward a shiny turquoise-blue door. "This is mine." He went into a room with leaf-green walls and plushy shag carpet to match. "Cool," I said. "Thanks. The church redecorated and we got to pick what we liked." Nathan set the bags and guitar down. "Which bed you want?" The beds were his childhood bunk beds, the top one mercifully taken down to make twin beds covered with striped woven spreads. Neither one of them looked long enough for Nathan. "I don't care. I usually sleep here." Nathan set his guitar down by the bed nearest the door, so I slung my duffel on the other one. The rest of his room didn't tell me much about him. He had a couple of posters up, Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young, and an Ozark Mountain Daredevils concert flyer. Nothing out on his dresser, a few books in a bookcase. He opened the closet door to show me where I could hang things if I wanted, and I saw that it was a walk-in, bigger than some of the library cubicles I'd worked in at college. I found myself being able to take deeper and deeper breaths. I'd never in my life had this much room to myself, and I was impressed by how careless Nathan was about it. Space was simply something he moved through, not something he claimed for his own. I'd always grasped at every inch I could get. At this point, Nathan hesitated and looked at me in a blank, uncertain sort of way, as if he didn't know what to do with me next. I wondered if he'd had second thoughts about inviting me for the whole summer. He seemed to be a person who wore out easily. "Hey, if you're beat," I told him, "I can go walk around outside or something." "No, I'm not tired." "You just don't have to entertain me, that's all." "No, I know." He straightened up a little. "Come on, I'll show you the rest of the place." We looked in Artis's room, a pale sandy pink, the woodwork in high-gloss turquoise. 2 serapes covered the bed, and the walls held things like a colorful bullfight poster and the kind of cheap wrought-iron decorations you could buy in border town markets. "Her Mexican dream," Nathan told me with affectionate sarcasm. "Dad says he hopes nobody from the parsonage committee ever comes up here." The third door off the hall was a bathroom, which hadn't been remodeled. When I went in, I saw 2 more doors, one on each side. "This house is kind of weird," Nathan said behind me. "Those doors aren't closets like you'd think. They lead into the attic." He opened one and showed me. Sure enough, a dark, unfinished attic with chairs and things piled around, and faint light showing from the house's eaves. "Artis gets scared to come in here at night. She's glad when I'm home because she doesn't have to sleep up here by herself." I shook my head and laughed obligingly, and we went back downstairs. Nathan showed me the formal living room, his parents' room, a big front bedroom which had been made into a study for Brother Whitley, and the den. This last had originally been a dining room, huge and high-ceilinged like the rest of the house. Now it held a sectional sofa, his dad's recliner, and of course the TV as focal point. Brother Whitley nodded at us from the recliner as we came through. "Supper pretty soon," he said. "Wash up." "Yes, sir," Nathan said, which I figured then was a military requirement, but which I learned later was a Southern thing. You said sir and ma'am to your elders no matter how old you were. Supper was more than I could eat. Salty ham and potatoes, homemade biscuits, 3 kinds of vegetables, and cake. I remember being amazed to see Nathan put away so much of it. Strange to think of him eating like that, considering how he was later on. Artis ate enthusiastically, too. She was the tiniest bit chubby and kind of sexy, with her long legs and long braids, her breasts filled out. But I told myself sternly that she was too young for me and that Brother Whitley would throw me out on my ass if I laid a hand on her. While I was having this conversation with myself, Mrs. Whitley said, "Well, did Artis tell you what happened just down the road?" "No," Artis said with a shudder and a guilty laugh. "I didn't." "What happened?" Nathan asked resignedly, glancing at me as if to say, "This ought to be good." "This was just a couple days ago," Brother Whitley said. "You know the old white house that sits at the corner of Porter's Chapel Road, where it turns off Highway 49, east of here?" "The one with those 2 little diamond-shaped windows in front," Artis contributed. "Oh, yeah," Nathan said. "Well, some old lady lived there by herself. Place falling down around her ears, you know, but she still had kids to come check on her, that kind of thing." Brother Whitley helped himself placidly to more ham. "So the other day a state trooper cruised by and noticed the front door open. You know, the house sits far back from the road. And he saw somebody lying there, half in, half out." "Geez," Nathan said. "Of course he figured foul play and drove in to take a look. But when he got his cruiser up by the front porch, he didn't dare get out, because that porch was covered with big old rattlesnakes. Dozens of 'em, curled up, slithering around, winding down the steps. And one of 'em was curled right up next to the old lady, and her lying there dead in the doorway." "Good Lord," Nathan said. I put down my fork carefully because my hands had started to shake. "But come to find out, not one of those snakes had bit her. She died of a heart attack right there at the door." "Seeing all those rattlesnakes, who wouldn't?" Artis added, and Mrs. Whitley just shook her head and said, "Mm-mm." "Where'd they come from?" Nathan asked. "Just wait," Artis told him. "Well, the trooper drove out of there and notified the sheriff and animal control, and when everybody came to investigate, those snakes had spread out all over the property, which stretches back about 5 acres. Those who were brave enough to get out and walk around said you couldn't take 3 steps without seeing another one." "What'd they do with them?" Nathan asked. "What do you think they did with a bunch of rattlesnakes?" Brother Whitley asked him back. "They let 'em alone. They managed to get the old lady out of there without getting bit, I don't know how, and got back in their cars and vans and vamoosed. Those snakes have probably spread all over the county by now." "But," Artis said, "this is the weirdest part." "One guy went farther back in the fields than anybody else, and he found a great big crevice in the ground, the kind that opens up when there's an earthquake. He said the dirt was still damp and fresh, and that when he looked in, he couldn't see the bottom of it." "Oh, come on," Nathan said, starting to grin. "Scout's honor," his father assured him. "You know Sheriff White's in our congregation, and he went out and saw it himself. Must have opened up in the middle of the night, after some sort of isolated earth tremor." He looked at me. "Ever hear of Reelfoot Lake?" "No, what is it?" My voice was almost steady. "It's in the northwest part of the state. It was caused by an earthquake back in the 1800s. We still have tremors around here sometimes, although not like you do in California." "So I reckon everybody's decided all the rattlesnakes came out of the crevice?" Nathan asked, laughing. "Oh, you bet. It's the talk of the town." Brother Whitley laughed too, but he added, "Stranger things have happened." "It's not funny," Mrs. Whitley chided. "That poor old lady." "Well, she was about 90, Artis said, and it wasn't even the snakes that got her. She died instantly of a heart attack, and she probably would have done that anyway." "Still," Mrs. Whitley said, and shook her head again. I didn't think it was funny either. The idea of those rattlesnakes loose all over the county made the soles of my feet sweat. But I didn't say anything, hoping the subject of snakes would be dropped, and to my relief Brother Whitley started talking to his wife about church business. After the meal, as we carried our plates to the kitchen sink, I heard Mrs. Whitley ask Nathan, "Well, do you have any new songs?" Nathan smiled a little. "Maybe a couple." "A couple," his mom said proudly. "When can we hear them?" "Yes, give us a concert," Brother Whitley said. "Tim, too. I'd like to hear what he does." This was a new idea to me, your parents wanting to hear your music. All I'd ever gotten was, "Timothy, stop banging on that damn guitar." Nathan was pleased, but I could tell he took it for granted. "Okay," he said, "for a little while." We'd started upstairs to get our guitars when the phone rang. Halfway up the steps, we heard Artis call, "Nathan, it's Paige!" Nathan turned right around and went back downstairs again, as enthusiastically as I'd ever seen him move, to pick up the phone in the hall. Shamelessly, I stayed where I was so I could eavesdrop. "Hey," he said, and after another minute, "Yeah." This was frustrating. I wanted to hear how he talked to her so I could imagine her answering. I could already picture her on the other end of the line because of the snapshot Nathan had showed me of her smiling, her silky red hair in a tumble and the sun in her eyes. Then I heard him laugh softly, and envy almost made my legs give out from under me. I went on upstairs and sat down on my bed. When Nathan came in a minute later, I was fooling with my shoelace. "So, when do I get to meet her?" I asked casually. "Tomorrow," Nathan said. "She's still at work. Hey, let's tune up here. We won't be able to downstairs with my parents talking." "Does she have any sisters or girlfriends or anything?" He laughed. "Want me to fix you up? Artis will go out with you." "Oh, sure, your dad'll love that." I lifted my cheap, no-name guitar out of its cardboard case. I like my women grown up, anyway. Nathan considered this as he took out his own guitar. He had an old Guild, not an expensive one, but with a better sound than mine. "Paige isn't my woman," he said finally. "You called her your girlfriend when you told me about her." "Yeah, but see, I never really think of another person as mine, belonging to me. People don't belong to other people." That was Nathan, always metaphysical. I shrugged, and we started tuning. I was suddenly ashamed of my old guitar that needed new strings I couldn't even afford. Sitting around the dorm, it hadn't seemed to matter. I'd never done much but strum along with Nathan anyway, learning the songs he'd written and maybe adding a little high harmony. At school, we'd been on equal terms, share and share alike. He'd fooled around with my songs, too. Now, on his turf, with his family listening, I was just some little crack kid along for the ride. But I knew what would happen if I said I wasn't bringing my guitar down. Nathan was stubborn about what he wanted musically. When I hesitated, he just nodded at my guitar. "Let's go," he said. So I trailed him back downstairs. His parents and Artis were settled in the living room where the piano was. "Neil Young," Artis said as I walked in. "You look like Neil Young, doesn't he, Nate?" Nathan glanced at me. "Little bit." "His hair's longer," Artis said judicially. "He sings better," Nathan told her. He laid his guitar down flat on the floor and went over to the piano, running one hand over the keys in a scale. He said, "needs to be tuned." "Play us something," his mother said comfortably, sipping iced tea. She looked at me and nodded toward 2 more glasses waiting for us. I tasted mine. It was sweetened already. Nathan sat down, swung his legs over the piano bench, and started playing this full Vince Guaraldi-type piece. I knew he could play Guaraldi because I'd heard him do the Linus and Lucy theme from the Peanuts cartoons in the band hall. This was something of his own, though, as I could tell when he started singing. His voice was low and soft, but it was enough to provide his usual counterpoint to whatever he was playing, which was what really interested him. I hadn't heard this one, and sat listening happily to his hands going all over the keys. His fingers could span an octave and a half, from middle C to high G. "Is it just me," Brother Whitley asked me when Nate was done, "or is he really a pretty talented musician?" Nathan looked at me over his shoulder, not quite rolling his eyes. I grinned at him, but I could answer his father readily enough. He sure is. He's the best thing the 3 o'clock jazz band's got going for it. You're no slouch either. Nathan got up, picked up his guitar, and settled by me on the sofa. Catching my eye, he started picking the intro to one of my tunes, an intro he'd made up, and nodded for me to join in. We did the song, a sappy little piece about lost love, as I remember, and his family murmured approvingly. Then we did one of Nathan's new ones that he and I had sat up practicing for hours one night. It had a beautiful melody, and with Nathan's long, strong fingers picking a counterpart, there wasn't much for me to do. I'd come up with a few underlying chords, like chimes, that I hoped added to it. Nathan sang lead, bending the rhythm and slurring the consonants in a way that always contrasted so oddly with that low, quiet voice. I thought we did it better than we ever had. But when we finished, Brother Whitley and Artis both looked sort of puzzled and solemn, and Mrs. Whitley actually had tears in her eyes. "Nathan, it's so sad," she said, wiping them. "Why so sad, honey?" I hadn't noticed. What interested me most about this song was the weird tuning he used. Now the last words rang in my ears. Homesick in the very lights of home. I looked at Nathan. His eyes seemed shuttered in a way I'd seen him close down when my questions got too personal. "It's just a song, Mom," he said. "But what are you homesick for?" "It's just words, okay?" "Pretty song," his dad said firmly. "Well, I wish you'd write something happy," Mrs. Whitley said. I glanced at Nathan again and saw him set his teeth while he tried to look unconcerned. I didn't think too much about it at the time. All that sweetened iced tea made me wake up about 3 in the morning to take a leak. For a minute I forgot where I was and stared at the dim square of the alcove window until I remembered. Then I made my way through the dark room, the shag carpet luxurious under my feet. In the hall I could see paler darkness from the open bathroom door. As I headed toward it, I saw a line of light beneath one of those closed doors leading to the attic. My first thought was that Artis was in there and she'd catch me in my briefs and T-shirt. Then, as I stepped onto the cracked linoleum, I heard guitar chords. I switched on the bathroom light and shut the door behind me. The music stopped. I went over to the attic door and yanked it open. Nathan looked back at me, his eyes leveled in a funny way, as if he'd been somewhere else and didn't appreciate being dragged back. He was hunched in a slat-backed wooden chair, his guitar on his lap, barefoot but still in his jeans. On the floor at his feet sat a tiny shaded lamp, the one from his dresser. Now I saw the long extension cord leading out the bathroom door and back down the hall to the bedroom. "What are you doing up?" I demanded. "I couldn't sleep." "Are you working on a song or something?" Nathan shrugged. "I'm not sure," he said vaguely. I would have thought he'd been smoking pot, except I couldn't smell any. "You do this a lot?" I asked him. "Sit in the attic?" Something felt wrong. This wasn't the detached, faintly amused Nathan I knew. This guy seemed lost, suspended. "Sometimes. I have trouble sleeping. I always have." "What do you do in the dorm? Sit in the showers?" "Walk the halls a lot. Sit downstairs in the lounge. You'd be surprised how deserted it is at 3 in the morning." "Nathan, man!" I felt sorry for him. "Why can't you sleep?" He shot me a look, checking me out to see if I could be trusted. "Just don't like nights," he said finally. "They go on forever." "Not if you sleep, they don't." "That's not an option." He tried one more time to explain. "Everything's weird at night. People lying around in trances they call sleeping. I have to keep doing something so I won't think about it." "You have to sleep sometimes, don't you?" "Yeah, but then I have all these dreams and wake up tired." I thought of my own black velvet sleep, of how I'd wake up with my limbs so relaxed they felt sunken into the mattress. "You ought to go to a doctor," I told him, "or a hypnotist maybe." I lost him there, his face closed. "I don't need a doctor. I just don't need as much sleep as most people, that's all. I'm going to bed now." He leaned down and picked up the little lamp with his free hand, the other grasping the neck of his guitar. "Coming?" The fact remained that I still had to pee. Yeah, go ahead," Nathan said, and went on down the hall. By the time I got back to the bedroom, the light was out, and he was only a mound in bed, his jeans in a heap on the floor, his guitar gleaming faintly from the corner where he'd propped it. But I had no idea when or if he ever got to sleep.